for After-School Arts Program from Urban Youth and Other Experts. I'm Ken Cole, Associate Director of the National Guild for Community Arts Education. This webinar is being presented by the National Guild in partnership with the Wallace Foundation. The Guild supports and advances access to lifelong learning opportunities in the arts. We foster the creation and development of nonprofit arts education programs and organizations by providing information services, professional development, networking opportunities, and funding. We also conduct research and advocate for equitable access to arts education. Through our Engaging Adolescence initiative, now in its 4th year, we focus on how to recruit and retain young people in high-quality arts education programs. Today's webinar will be 1 hour in length. The presentation will last approximately 50 minutes. We'll spend the final 10 minutes responding to questions. Because more than 500 people have joined us today, your lines are muted. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the question box in the upper right corner of your screen. Before we begin, let me mention that a recording of today's presentation will be available free of charge beginning Monday, December 2nd, via nationalguild.org and wallacefoundation.org. And now I'm pleased to welcome the Director of the Arts at the Wallace Foundation, Daniel Windham, to tell us more about their new research report, Something to Say, also available free of charge at wallacefoundation.org.
Thank you, Ken, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest in our new research report, Something to Say, Success Principles for After-School Arts Programs from Urban Youth and Other Experts. There are at least 2 strong beliefs in that title, and I suspect you share them. First, after-school arts programs can succeed in attracting and retaining large numbers of young people in urban, low-income communities. And second, that these young people themselves certainly have something to say on the topic. What the research did not perceive to prove was the value or the benefit of arts learning. We're convinced from the available research and by examining our own lives that deep engagement in high-quality arts experiences provides valuable benefits, including the confidence that comes with progressive skill building, increased empathy and cognitive growth, and at the group level, profound social bonds and communal meaning. Young people, especially those from the ages of 10 to 13, the so-called tweens, can benefit particularly from arts instruction as they navigate the transition from childhood and to the more independent but also more rigid teen years. So what does it take to attract teens to an arts program and keep them coming back? Instead of guessing at answers, we commissioned a rigorous study to find out, engaging a market research firm, Next Level SMG, to apply a consumer marketing approach. The research interviewed hundreds of tweens, teens, and their families, as well as the directors of exemplary youth arts programs nationwide and experts in youth arts instruction. What do tweens want in arts programs, and how does that stack up against what we often think they need? Readers have found the answers compelling, useful, and sometimes surprising. Our hope is that this work will provide both practical guidance to those interested in engaging tweens in high-quality arts instruction, as well as the inspiration that is both possible and vital to do so. We're fortunate to be joined today by Peter Rogovin and Denise Montgomery, co-authors of Something to Say, Success Principles for After-School Arts Programs from Urban Youth and Other Experts, to hear firsthand about the study and its results. The report was released last week and is available free of charge at wallacefoundation.org. I thank you for joining us, and I'm pleased to introduce the founder of Next Level SMG, Peter Rogovin.
Thanks, Daniel. Denise and I are really pleased to be part of this webinar and to be able to share some of our findings and insights today. We have a lot to cover, so I'll jump right in. But first, I also want to thank the Wallace Foundation, and especially you, Daniel, for supporting the project and for Wallace's leadership in the fields of arts and after school for low-income youth, as well as your commitment to disseminating research findings to the field so that others can learn from the experiences of your grantees. Also want to thank Ken and his team at the National Guild for Community Arts Education for their partnership and support in sharing the findings from our research. So I am the founder of Next Level Strategic Marketing Group, which is a marketing consultancy in New York. And generally, we help clients figure out how things that are changing in their markets, such as customer needs or competition, affect how they market their products or services. Most of our clients are for-profit, but interest in using the same models to address the market challenges of not-for-profits is increasing. So when Daniel approached us about this project, we were really excited to help them in applying a consumer lens to people who are not always thought of as consumers, and to see if we could identify insights that might help organizations rethink how they were going to market. So let's get to it. What I'd like to share over the next hour is, first, I'm going to speak about our research approach and methodology, as well as a few research insights that are relevant to the challenge of tween engagement. Then I'll hand it over to Denise, who will walk you through the 10 principles. And after that, we'll be happy to take questions or hear comments on anything that we're covering today. So the paper was released last week, and this is probably the largest convening that we've been part of. So thanks also to all of you for taking your time to hear more about the report. I'd like to start by mentioning that our title, Something to Say, Success Principles for After-School Arts Programs from Urban Youth and Other Experts, was chosen for two reasons. First, because of the myriad ways that young people say something about themselves and their lives through the arts. And second, because the research with young people followed a consumer research model. And on your screen are some of the images taken from our field research, focus groups, and interviews with young people and parents in facilities and in their homes. So what I mean by consumer research model is that our line of inquiry was designed to understand how urban tweens from low-income households make choices about the ways they spend their out-of-school time. They may not have a lot of disposable income, but because they choose how to spend their time, and they can opt to shoot hoops, hang out, play video games, text, read, do homework, they are, by definition, consumers. Now, even though the subject of the research is how to get young people who aren't too engaged to become more so, the consumer research model always starts with people who are already engaged, what we call the heavy user. And that's because someone who's already decided that out-of-school time arts is fun and worthwhile can tell us a lot about their pathway to getting there, their barriers, what they like, what they don't like, what their families and friends think, did they ever quit, how did they come back, and so on. So if we were doing consumer research on how to get people to drink more coffee, we'd start with people who drink 3 to 4 cups a day, and then eventually we'd get to speaking to people who drink 1 cup of coffee a day or 1 cup of coffee a week, and we try to figure out if there was a pathway to more consumption. So our heavy users were the arts-engaged teens. Now, to find people with whom to speak, we worked with a research partner to identify urban areas in different parts of the country, and they sent local scouts to find community centers and churches where we could hold our groups. We put signs up with a toll-free number in grocery stores and community centers, houses of worship, and near schools, saying that we were doing focus groups and to call if interested. Respondents were screened against a number of criteria, including demographics, the level of arts interest and participation, and the ability to speak clearly about their choices. Now, in terms of their interest in arts, if you think about arts engagement on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all engaged or someone who just rejects participation in arts, and 10 is highly engaged, we tried to screen out the 1s and 2s because rejectors are not very helpful in focus groups. They tend to contribute less, and actually their presence can negatively impact the dynamics of the group if they're saying negative things about the arts, and then we're trying to get insights from other people about why they might participate more in the arts. And no one wants to sit in a room and talk for 2 hours about a topic they're not interested in. So we generally had people who were from 3 to 10, and I'd say most of them were probably in the 3 to 6 or 3 to 7 range. We were in, overall we spoke with 64 teens, those were our heavy users. We then spoke with about 150 tweens and 70 parents and caregivers. We were in 5 metro areas, the Bay Area, California, Philadelphia and Newark, Cleveland, Providence and Boston, and Birmingham. Most of the people we spoke with participated in the research through focus groups and community centers, about 6 to 8 people per group, and the groups were usually same gender, same race. We also conducted 11 ethnographic studies where a social anthropologist did extended in-home interviews with the young person, their parents, and 2 of the young person's friends. This allowed us to get a perspective on how arts are viewed within the subject's social circle, and that's information that's harder to surface when you're talking to a group of 6 to 8 young people in a focus group who don't know each other. All of the tweens who participated had to maintain a photo journal and a diary for 1 week leading up to the focus group of how they spent their out-of-school time and their time on weekends, and all of the tweens, teens, and parents who participated in research were compensated for their time. So that's a summary of the consumer, or what we call the demand side of the research. On what we call the supply side, we did in-depth interviews with a range of experts in out-of-school time in the arts, and we also did case studies on some of the most highly regarded youth development arts programs in the country to understand what lessons they gleaned from their years of experience. In all, 22 key opinion leaders and 8 case studies. We ran the consumer and the expert research as separate but parallel work streams, and that's an important element of our research design, which I'm going to come back to later. And it was all in service of answering these 3 research questions. First, how can urban low-income tweens and teens gain equal access to high-quality arts experiences? Second, is there a model of practices that could provide a blueprint for community-based organizations to emulate so that proven approaches can be deployed in more places more often? And third, is there a way to approach the analysis of these problems that respects and honors young people as consumers who make informed choices? And how does what youth want align with what other experts say they need? So let's start with teens and tweens. Teens, and I'm defining teens as adolescents aged 14 to 18, have been studied for years, and we know quite a bit about them, such as their essential task of identity formation. Tweens, early adolescents, who are approximately 10 to 13 years old, 5th to 8th grade, middle school, are a distinctly different group than teens. Now, one of the key things to understand about tweens is that they very much want to join the teen world. And as crazy as that might seem to those of us who remember our teen years as difficult or awkward, there are millions of tweens who just can't wait to become teenagers. At the same time, tweens are still clinging to a lot of childhood norms. Now, tweens' primary concern is about where they belong socially and how to belong socially, which is different from teens who are concerned about showing the world who they are. So if we think about the teen years as the time to develop individual identity and ego, the tween years are a time to develop one's group identity and affiliation, or what Dr. Gil Noem, a psychologist and expert in out-of-school time at Harvard University, calls WeGo. And if you work with tweens, you see this playing out all the time. They travel in packs, and they're very concerned about which pack they belong to, but when they change packs, they may have an entirely new group of friends almost overnight. What's especially hard about this time for young people is that it was just a few years ago they were playing with dolls or action figures, and they're faced with a barrage of messages from the media and society to grow up sooner and faster. So while tweens may feel more like this on the inside, media images and societal pressures are telling them that they should look and start acting like this. Now, I want to share 3 top-line findings from the research. There are many, many more in the report, but 3 I want to talk about during this webinar are: first, the importance of a demand-oriented mindset; second, decision-making inside the tween household; and third, the impact of social networking. The tweens in our study did not easily associate the terminology arts or arts programs with activities that they said held the most appeal to them, and those activities included dancing, singing, design, digital media, fashion, especially sneaker design for boys, beat making, or cheerleading, which was seen by young people as closer to dance than sport due to its choreography. When we asked them what they thought when we said the term arts, or arts programs, they said drawing, painting, and sculpture, generally the visual arts. And sometimes they said, you know, the kinds of things that you would see in a museum. So besides its association with visual arts, there's also a close association between arts and arts and crafts, a term that carries a little bit of negative baggage. Now, what we're talking about when we say arts and crafts are projects that are less about creating an original artwork and more about following a prototype shown by an instructor, typically requiring little skill to execute, such as a yarn and twig cat eye. The problem is that by the time the young people become tweens, they're ready to move on. And their interest in other art forms, even if they don't call them arts, is starting to grow. The larger challenge of the association between arts and crafts is that arts and crafts is strongly associated with young kids, a stage and an age from which tweens have decidedly graduated. It's not to say that the tweens dislike arts and crafts activities, just that their stage of development compels them to create distance from activities that are associated with young children. Right, so coming out of this, there are two imperatives from this shift to having a demand-oriented mindset in program design. And the first is to think about the consumer's vocabulary. So for starters, we'd really caution against taking a collection of offerings that might include dance, digital media, and beat making, and grouping them as your organization's arts programs. Because when an organization does, it may be communicating a narrower and potentially less appealing set of activities. This is just a classic example of a simple miscommunication that's rooted in one word that means different things across generations. So instead of trying to sum it up at the category level with the term arts, use more descriptive names that are engaging. Things like adventures in media, digital storytelling would be good, or zombies take New York, and there are some zombies now, might be even better. A second imperative is to review the offerings and ensure that they meet both the demand of the consumers, the young people, not just the interest of the suppliers, the organization. So offering a class because the staff member has an interest in teaching guitar might satisfy the supply side. We have a teacher, we have some guitars, we have a room to play in, but does it meet the needs of young people in that community who may want a different art form or a different art form combined with digital media? So just as in economics, they say the market is defined where supply and demand meet, so it is with programs. They need to be in the sweet spot between what they can credibly and enthusiastically supply and what young people want and need. I want to share some of the findings about decision making. Now, in our study, the tween years were defined as that turning point where young people stopped going to the places their parents sent them and started playing an active role in scoping and selecting their out-of-school time activities. Parents reported that they're much more likely to react to the tweens' initiatives and suggestions versus demanding or recommending programs to them. And tweens themselves reported a pretty sophisticated understanding of how to gather information and approach their parents with the ask, and then engage in negotiation when they wanted to be part of the program. They understood their parents' priorities, whether it was a logistical issue like how far from home, or a financial issue, it can't be more than a certain amount of money. And they also understood their parents' weaknesses. Here's what some of them had to say. A sixth grade girl from Cleveland said, my parents encourage me to do what I want. A fifth grade boy in Newark said, I have 75% of the decision power, and I make more of the decisions. I say there's things I want to do. My mom would have to make sure it's okay. And this girl from Cleveland, I'd find out a whole bunch of information about it, then I'd ask my mom, and if she said no, I'd keep on looking. And if she'd still say no, I would beg her. So right away, one question to ask as you look at the content and voice of your marketing is whether you're trying to get to the tween through the parent, or you're motivating and equipping the tween to successfully negotiate their participation with the parent. And our research suggests that the latter will be more effective. I want to share just a couple of findings from the parent groups that we thought were interesting. First, along with the shift in the nature of decision making, parents sometimes reluctantly acknowledged that their tweens' newfound freedom, that they had a lot less control over where they were, and they actually admitted to some resignation over the fact that they couldn't compel their children to do something they didn't want to do. When we asked if they would make their child finish a program that they'd started, for the most part they said, well, no, if they don't like it, we can't make them finish. They felt those were battles that were not worth fighting. Second, many parents see some of the benefits of arts in the broad sense, like relaxation, time management, cultural awareness, what we call these higher order goals, but these connections were somewhat tepid, at least compared to the connections between life goals and sports, where parents more easily and enthusiastically connected their child's commitment to higher order goals like discipline and teamwork. So it was also true that there was a concern for arts was more of a nice to have than a ticket out of poverty. They said it's fun, it's good, but it's hard to make a living. And as one parent in Newark said, there's a tremendous amount of failure in the arts. You're going to need a good backup plan because you might not succeed. And this is a real challenge for arts programs. Parents don't easily make these connections. There are fewer stories of the artists from the low-income neighborhood who made it big than there are of stories of athletes who did the same. It's important for organizations to plant the seeds that art and creative expression can also lead to vocational opportunities. I guess I could sum up by saying that the image of the struggling artist occupies a really big part of the parents' mind space. And what they see less of are the many careers that rely on the type of skills that good arts programs can instill. So the third finding we wanted to share is that engagement is shaped in many ways, not just by social and psychological development and what's happening in the home, but also by the fact that today young people are wired. They're being raised at a time of almost unlimited choice. Any book or product can be found on Amazon, any trinket on eBay, every pop star is on YouTube. And they have a profound sense that if what they're doing at the moment isn't interesting, they can find something better with little effort, which means their connection and commitment to what they're doing at any point in time is tenuous. Anyone who works with young people knows that when they're on their phone, or when their phone is in their possession, they're easily distracted. And some people would say I'm being a little bit too polite. But looking at this from the consumer's vantage point, they aren't always trying to be disrespectful, maybe sometimes, but for them, they're just highly skeptical that whatever they're doing right now is the best use of their time. So they use texting and tweeting and location-based services to find their friends and to find out what they might be missing, which often seems more compelling than what they're doing right now. So you think about what this means. At the exact developmental moment when they're hyper-concerned about their social standing and what their friends think about them and what their friends think about what they're doing, their parents give up some control over their child's time. And at that exact moment, many of them receive a tool that allows them to access information about other things to do, where their friends are, not to mention apps and internet access. To them, it seems like the perfect tool for the stage they're in, even if to parents and educators it might seem like the perfect storm. Our ability to engage them in arts programming competes not only with other ways to use their time, but also with collective impact and input of what 6 or 8 other tweens think. And those opinions are coming to them in a steady stream of texts. As one boy from Oakland told us about his likelihood to go to an arts program, I might not go if other people keep telling me it's whack. And that perfectly sums up the tween challenge. They might like it a lot, but that isn't enough. It has to be accepted by their friends, and the tweens sense that their friends may judge their arts participation too harshly, or they may be missing something, and quitting is easy, then they're out of there. There was little sense of obligation to finish what was started. There are few parental penalties for disengagement, and that always connected element is an accelerant of this occurrence. All of this dials up the importance for programs to be immediately engaging from the get-go and deeply immersive, and Denise will talk about that shortly when she talks about the 10 principles. So lastly, we asked tweens, if you were to design the perfect out-of-school time arts program, the one you and your friends would want to go to, what would it be like? And you can see these are some scenes from the focus groups where they're actually working on trying to figure out what the program attributes would be. What was really amazing to us is that their answers were consistent across age, younger tweens and older tweens, geography, gender, and race. They wanted expert instructors. One 7th grader from Oakland said, someone who knows what they're talking about. better if they earn a living from that so you feel secure in what they know. Or as a 5th grader from New Jersey said, they have to be famous. If not, then top-notch, the best in New Jersey. They wanted hands-on experiential learning in inspired spaces. One young woman from South Philly, an 8th grader, said, I don't want to talk about it a lot. I want to get straight to it. They want new friends with shared interests, especially from new neighborhoods. They like culminating events, a chance to show off what they learned and what they've accomplished. And they like rituals and badges of membership, and especially food, which is both a commentary on their insatiable appetites as they're growing, as well as the sad state of hunger in America, though there's often not enough to eat at home, and these programs play a growing role in providing sustenance. Now, I want to make just 2 quick comments before I turn it over to Denise about this list and the exercise of asking young people to describe the perfect arts program. First, we asked them to do this, and then we said, okay, so that's your perfect arts program. Now, if you had all those things, would you go? And somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the tweens in our research said, no, probably not. And we said, wait, hang on. You can put anything you want in that program. This is your program, the one that's designed around your needs. Why wouldn't you go? And what they told us was that for them, art was an escape. It was part of their private time, not social time. The ones who said they wouldn't go to a program even if it was built around their needs said they do it for themselves, not to achieve mastery or to make social connections. And so it's important to remember that while we need to listen to the consumer, we also need to challenge our own assumptions about cause and effect, that sometimes giving them everything that they ask for won't necessarily make them come. It's not a failure of research, but a way to listen to it, right? So even giving them what they want may not overcome all of their functional or social barriers. Not everyone wants a formal program, and there may be more young people interested in doing arts than is indicated by program attendance. The second thing I wanted to mention is that this list and many of the other findings of our research with tweens, teens, and their caregivers overlap significantly with what experts and practitioners say on the supply side of our research. As I mentioned before, it was a key element, a key design element of our research to balance the demand side, what the consumer wants, with the supply side, what the researchers and practitioners and experts say works. And so what that means broadly speaking is that what experts say young people need is very often exactly what young people want. It doesn't always work out that way in research, but it did in this case, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as I turn the floor over to Denise, who's going to talk about the 10 principles.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. This is a great time to stand up and stretch if you're at your desk or if you're in a conference room with colleagues and just get the blood moving. I'm so happy to be joining all of you and so glad that this webinar technology enables us to come together. I know we have people on the line from California to New York and from Minnesota to Texas and all points in between. So it's great to be together out of our combined and shared commitment to arts in the lives of young people. So why are some out-of-school time arts programs so successful in attracting and retaining tweens and teens? And why is it that other programs struggle to get tweens and teens in the door? And once they do get youth to try out their programs, the organizations are challenged to retain their participation. We wanted to also know if best practice youth development arts organizations across the country are doing many things alike, what those practices are, and if they might be exportable and replicable in other programs. The answer to those last questions is yes. In fact, a strikingly consistent set of principles emerged from our study of the best practice organizations and was validated in our interviews with key opinion leaders, experts in adolescence, after school, and the arts, as well as in the literature review. So the 10 principles are what we found out in this exploration. And within the 10 principles, the first 5 may be very familiar to those who work in the arts. The second 5 are more youth development centric and maybe more familiar to those who work in youth development. Given that our intended audiences for the report include youth development organizations and program providers, along with arts organizations, teaching artists, and funders, we think there's something valuable for everyone, and that the magic of the principles isn't, or the power of the principles, isn't in their newness or discovery, but in the ways that they're applied in practice and significantly in aggregating them, because the really successful organizations do all of them in some fashion. Okay. So now we'll get to an overview of the principles. So the 10 principles are not listed in a particular order with one exception, the first principle. We lead with this because of how important this component is to the overall strength of out-of-school time arts programs. A question that we love to ask when we met with arts organizations, because it led to such rich responses, was what's in your secret sauce? As in, what makes your program successful? The most common answer by a wide margin was this: using practicing professional artists as instructors. Practicing professionals have more to teach youth because they have more experience and knowledge themselves of the art form, of artistic technique, of the creative process. Youth are drawn to this real-world experience. And what we're talking about in terms of professionals are people who exhibit the markers of professionalism, who are compensated for their art, who actively exhibit, publish, perform, who are trained and or have a degree in their discipline. Even if they augment their income from their art with other work like teaching, being an artist is their chosen profession, not just a hobby. Such artist instructors possess a unique credibility among youth participants who, our research showed, are more receptive to meeting high standards and project deadlines set by people with the same expectations for themselves. Also, we all know that tweens and teens don't want to feel duped. And if someone doesn't have the experience or really know what they're doing, it's a real turnoff and youth disengage. So hobbyists and well-meaning volunteers will not be able to take youth beyond their own limitations in terms of skills and knowledge. And you'll see that the principles interrelate, and we'll talk about skills more later, but this quote makes the link between professional practicing artists and youth engagement in programs because youth want to build skills, and professional artists are most able to make that happen. Of course, the teaching artist must want to work with youth and be effective in working with youth. That's obviously really important. So some people think that artists should donate their time to after-school programs, and many artists generously do. However, it's difficult to sustain a quality program predicated on the ongoing volunteerism of unpaid professionals. So high-quality, sustainable, out-of-school time arts programs hire practicing professional artists, and they pay them to be able to retain such quality staff. And that's another place where the principles interrelate, where relationships are so important. And so retention, where you have staff that are part of an organization for years at a time, that really supports and facilitates having deeper relationships and bonds with young people. So this principle is not the place to cut corners, and practicing professional artists as instructors are the foundation on which to build a high-quality out-of-school time arts programs. So moving to the second principle about executive directors, this point may seem obvious to this audience, but consider its importance and how it can't be assumed in youth-serving organizations offering programs in multiple areas such as athletics, academics, and the arts. And we also talked to a number of organizations that fit this description, that have multiple program areas, to find out what's working for them and what's helping them be so successful in their arts programs and overall. So the executive directors, as the best practice organizations we studied, are outspoken advocates for the arts. They do more than merely include arts programs in their program mix. They actively take steps to help arts programs thrive. And here's a list of some of the specific measures that they take. They're including the arts program person in senior management meetings so they can be a part of decisions, so they're plugged into what's going on, so they can advocate for their program and build relationships. These organizations also allocate dedicated physical space to arts programs, and they ensure that the arts are a visible part of the organization's identity, such as in annual reports and on the website. So here's a screenshot from the website of HOLA, or Heart of Los Angeles, and you can see that the arts are a featured program area side by side with academics and athletics. So a teaser for you is that the research report includes a section on how to turn CEOs into arts program advocates. And this could be a useful resource to hand to a potential partner to give them ideas about how to get their CEO on board in supporting arts programs. And that came directly from practitioners with their experiences and success stories and advice. So principle 3, spaces matter, and while arts programs have practical facility needs ranging from ventilation to lighting to storage for supplies, spaces matter for symbolic and emotional reasons as well. Dedicated physical areas signal to youth that arts programs are valued and worthy. Urban sociologist Ray Oldenburg talks about people needing a third place, which is a social gathering location separate from home and work, or in the case of tweens and teens, a social gathering location that's separate from home and school. So dedicated art spaces for these programs can be that third place for young people and place of belonging. Our research pointed to 3 key factors in using space to drive the culture and creative energy of out-of-school time arts programs. First, that young people feel the space is theirs and reflects their vision and values. Many organizations, including SACI in San Antonio, Texas, one of the case studies, told us about early days in their programs when space was dilapidated, but youth didn't mind because the space belonged to them. The research report discusses the teen lounge movement in Philadelphia, where at least 5 Philadelphia arts programs have created teen lounges, as pictured here at Fleischer Art Memorial in South Philadelphia. We've also heard talk among organizations about a tween lounge movement, so that seems to be percolating. The second factor is that the space is positive and affirming. And the image here is of 826 Valencia, which is a creative writing and tutoring center with noteworthy warm and inviting spaces with wood tables and rugs and bookcases. And one feature that makes 826 fun and special to youth is that the program portion of the space is accessed through a secret passageway in each of the 826 centers across the country, and this one is via a hidden moving bookcase. So the third factor is that the space is functional and dedicated to one or more art forms. So if a space is going to be used for dance, for example, it should have appropriate flooring and mirrors. So principle 4, a hallmark of youth organizations is their belief in young people's capacity for achievement. So a principle around high expectations may not seem groundbreaking. The principle here has the added dimension of affirming youth participants as artists. Calling youth artists, dancers, writers reinforces the belief in their ability to produce quality work and that their work is being taken seriously. Another aspect of this principle in practice that we saw through the case studies and heard about in our interviews is mandatory attendance or mandatory hours. Many of the programs have mandated attendance because high-quality programs have ambitious goals, and young people can't come in for just 2 hours a month and build skills and make progress toward those goals. A third important dimension of high expectations as they manifest in out-of-school time arts programs is that the youth are creating original works of art as opposed to more of an arts and crafts model of following a prototype. And we acknowledge that there are many ways to approach skill building in the arts. Our focus was on how to engage urban low-income youth, and we found creating original works of art to be a consistent theme in the organizations that we studied. And lastly, formalized peer and expert critique. And we're not talking about hollow praise where every effort is treated as a masterpiece, but rather authentic discussion of young people's work with validation for their efforts. Still, the self-publishing trend has lowered the bar, and programs face a new set of challenges due to the proliferation of amateur videos on YouTube and elsewhere on the web. And because of the ease with which young people can create and post work online, tweens and teens may arrive at a program thinking they don't have much to learn because they've been there, done that. So one way to set expectations for quality work that we heard about from the case study organizations is to show young people high-caliber projects produced by their peers, such as at Spy Hop, a media arts organization based in Salt Lake City. And their annual Pitchnik film screening is a celebration and a screening of the film projects that young people have worked on all year. And it also gives an opportunity for the people who are coming into that program to see the level of quality and ambition and effort put forth by their peers, and to get a feeling that they can do that themselves, to know that they can strive for that. So moving into Principle 5 about culminating events, a high-quality arts program builds toward an apex. It's never 8 weeks of practice and then a simple pat on the back for a job well done. culminating events such as a performance or an exhibition provide focal points for young people's experiences with out-of-school-time arts programs. And for tweens and teens who spend so much time in a virtual world, presenting their work to a real audience is especially powerful, because the reality is for the vast majority of youth, going viral and the mass internet audience for their work just doesn't materialize. So the ability to reach a real, substantial audience is one feature that differentiates strong out-of-school-time programs from what youth might experience by creating work independently. In fact, that audience is a key element to an effective culminating event, an audience that extends beyond the program participants and staff to include parents and caregivers, friends, peers, community members, and even the media. And people who work with youth every day, like Adelma Nasco, formerly of the New Mexico School of the Arts, attest to the importance of a real audience. And she shared this quote with us about how much that means to young people, and keeping it real too, that it's not just people that love them and are going to tell them they did a great job, automatically, but really having a public audience. What's more, culminating events shine a spotlight on participants' accomplishments, and youth get to experience that, wow, I never knew you had this talent, from family members, friends, peers, and others. This image is from a Boys and Girls Club performance. Principle 6, about relationships, both with adults and peers. Given the vast amount of free how-to videos and creative inspiration available online, why do young people need structured out-of-school-time programs to advance their artistic pursuits? A major reason is their desire for meaningful flesh-and-blood relationships, both friendships with other young people and bonds with caring adults. We found in our research that mentoring forms the focus of the relationships between youth participants and adults in the best practice youth development arts organizations. Regarding the power of relationships through out-of-school-time programs, Jason Yoon, formerly of New Urban Arts in Providence, Rhode Island, and now with the Queens Museum of Art, I thought really eloquently pointed out this quote about the dignity between an adult and a young person. We learned from practitioners and researchers that peer mentoring, where youth are mentoring other youth, perhaps who are younger or with less experience in the art form, is a particularly valuable strategy for both the person doing the mentoring and the person being mentored, who can see the possibility of becoming a mentor someday themselves. So how do great arts programs build a culture of mentorship and belonging? They're intentional about many things, three of which I'll mention here. First is language, and the organizations in our study frequently use terms such as artist mentors and poet mentors to describe teaching artists, which signals there's a mutually respectful relationship among the adult and young people, as well as skill sharing or reciprocal learning. They tend to avoid terms like instructors or teachers. The second is facilitating trusting relationships. In the bonds that form between youth participants are particularly shared by tweens and teens, in part because they're formed through a shared interest in film or in poetry or in painting, rather than the proximity-based relationships that they more commonly experience through neighborhoods and schools. Life can be difficult for the arts kids or the kids that self-identify as creative, especially in school cultures that often revere athletes or other groups. And many youth that we spoke with at the case study organizations talked about finding their people and how important that has been to them. So best practice youth development arts organizations find ways to nurture trusting relationships. River's Edge Arts Project in Woonsocket, Rhode Island provides support to youth through a daily self-rating system. So each day when the youth participants arrive, they indicate on a 1 to 5 scale how they're doing that day. And the students are aware that a rating below a 3 or several straight days of 3s will trigger a River's Edge staff member to follow up with them one-on-one. So in this way, the young people can easily exercise the option to get focused adult support, and the artist mentors are able to gauge where to direct their attention. The ratings are publicly posted on the sign-in board and also generate support from other youth, and the organization said that they're comfortable doing that because the young people are participating at least 8 hours a week, so they really have strong relationships because of all the time that they're spending with each other. And River's Edge said that there's a lot of compassion and support that flows from young people to each other through this rating system and just in general. So lastly, rituals. And these can be a special way of starting the day or an annual event, perhaps a rite of passage for youth leaving a program. These customs and unique practices foster belonging because participants feel in the know as the custom becomes familiar to them. The research report includes a section with a number of specific examples of rituals in the case study organizations. Principle number 7. As we conducted our research, we saw a model for youth involvement that really pushed the concept of youth leadership forward. We observed programs where young people participated in planning, telling program staff and directors what program offerings they wanted, and the program directors obliged. We saw programs where young people actively participated in board meetings, sometimes by holding a seat on the board. There's a real sense of collaboration among adults and youth in how these organizations are run. So how much is the right amount of involvement? A general guideline is that tween programs are youth-informed and teen programs are youth-led. Principle 8. It's increasingly important to front-load the excitement and fun and get young people engaged in the doing from the very beginning. That familiar model of having the introductory lecture where you find out what you're going to do and the ground rules are laid, that doesn't work so well with tweens and teens today. Where there's technology involved, the organizations try to get the youth exposed to it as early as possible, and when there's no technology, we see successful programs that just get youth immersed immediately. So for example, the National Dance Institute of New Mexico gets kids up and dancing within 15 minutes of the very first class. So what we saw and learned is that if young people don't feel like they did something interesting and fun from day one, they might not be back. So engagement is about pace and immersion, and it can be about access to equipment and technology. One example of rapid engagement through actual doing is how youth radio in Oakland, California, puts young people on the air for a live web radio show by their second week in the program. The veteran participants cheer on the newcomers who are buoyed by the obvious confidence the organization has in them, and they also almost immediately tackle what might seem to be the most intimidating aspect of the program, going live on the air. So part rite of passage and part engagement strategy, the thrill of doing a broadcast so soon creates excitement and pride about participating in youth radio, and you can imagine the momentum that this generates. Principle 9. These organizations cast a wide yet selective net of community supporters, tapping a broad spectrum of sectors from healthcare to law enforcement to business, the media, and the arts. And what these varied community movers and shakers have in common is concern for the lives of young people. Shirley Bryce-Heath, longtime researcher in Out of School Time, had this to say during our interview with her, and I'll share this quote with you. Heath advocates reaching out to such community members and saying, we'd really love to have you come, and we're doing this work now, and we need to have your input. We want you to be there to advise us on what you see. What did you hear? What did you learn? So that's clearly moving beyond connecting with the usual suspects, parents, and sometimes schools, in the typical manner. And then Principle 10 is about a physically and emotionally safe space for youth. In the arts, emotional safety is particularly important. These programs need to be places where youth can express their fears, pain, and struggles, as well as their joys and aspirations, knowing their self-expression will be met with respect and compassion. One of the teen poets at Youth Speaks in San Francisco, Stephanie Yoon, who's pictured in this photograph on the far right, had this to say about safe spaces. And lastly, Gil Noem of Harvard describes what can happen in an atmosphere where youth feel comfortable participating in programs and expressing themselves creatively, and I think this is just such a beautiful notion and quote. So that was a quick run through the 10 principles, and I'll make just one point about implementation, and that's that the organizations we studied have built up to where they are today in terms of their overall operations and their implementation of these principles. In many cases, they took years to get to where they are now. So our hope is that the principles create an understanding of the benefits that organizations and youth accrue when these principles are in place, and there's something to work toward. We encourage you to read the research report, which is available as a free download on the Wallace Foundation website, and which provides a richer, more detailed discussion on the principles and many specific examples of the principles in action. Also available online, in addition to the report and executive summary, is a library of 12 short videos. There are 6 highlighting best practice youth development arts organizations, 1 short project summary, and then 5 highlight videos from our interviews with some of the key opinion leaders, including Shirley Bryce-Heath, Gil Milne, and Lissa Soap. Thank you, and we're happy to take questions and to hear your comments.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you, Peter. This is Ken Cole again from the National Guild for Community Arts Education, and we do have quite a few questions coming in, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the next few minutes. Peter, a question for you. I know that the research was focused on urban low-income teens, but to what degree might the findings apply to other groups of teens and tweens, say suburban youth or upper-income tweens?
Well, if I put my researcher hat on, which I do for this kind of question, we didn't compare the responses of low income to high income. We only looked at low income. That being said, most of what we heard, it just empirically and just kind of thinking it through, what's going to be different in low income are probably the barriers and maybe the options that they have. The issues around tween psychological and social development are going to be consistent across different demographic groups. So, and we've also been asked, and does it apply outside of arts, and do the principles work outside of arts? And we're thinking they probably would, but we haven't looked at it in detail. But that's sort of a mildly conditioned yes. We think most of them will apply outside of low-income urban.
One of the questions that came in was about teen councils, and are there organizations that employ teen councils in their decision-making process that get kids involved in really leading the organizations, as you referenced earlier? And could you perhaps name a couple?
Sure. CC in San Antonio, Texas, they have liaisons. So for each program, so in media arts and theater and visual arts, they have 2 liaisons for their programs, and they are in regular contact with the staff, and they function as that voice of young people participating in the program. There's also a weekly meeting that occurs at SAC where all of the young participants are coming together with the full staff. SAC also has a youth on their board too, so they are really walking the talk in terms of embracing youth input and youth voice. Another example is at Fleischer Art Memorial, and their teen lounge functions as it's a drop-in format technically, but what they experience is that there's usually a core of participants who are really regularly coming, and then they engage the youth in selecting and actually in writing the request for proposals for artist residencies, and then also in selecting the artists who will become their mentors, and based on youth input, Fleischer has refined their process in doing this, and so one of the steps that they've taken is to have the prospective artists come in and do a demonstration for young people so that the youth can get a sense of the teaching approach of the artist, and just kind of how it feels to be around them. And that was all based on teen input. We've heard from a number of organizations about youth involvement in hiring processes where there might be finalists. Spy Hop in Salt Lake City talked about how they had 2 finalists for a position, and they had, I think, 5 youth spend some time with each of the finalists. There were no staff from the organization in the room, and then they had a unanimous recommendation from the young people about which of the finalists they wanted to have hired. And interestingly, it was a person who had who was older than the other candidate, but who had a depth of experience that the young people were drawn to, and who had just a strong orientation toward working with youth in terms of the types of questions that he apparently was asking them during the meeting that they had.
So just a few more minutes on the clock. We do have quite a few questions, so I'd like to do a time check. Peter and Denise, if we could extend until, say, 2:10 to take some of these additional questions that are coming in. Are you able to stay with us today?
We're delighted to stay on the line and hope that others will stay on as well.
Okay, great. And as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we will be collecting all of the questions that are coming in and responding to them in writing after the Thanksgiving holiday. So if we don't get to your question today, be patient with us, and we'll post something online, written response to it. So let me get to a couple of other questions. One, I think that maybe in many people's mind is about barriers, common barriers that youth encounter in these. You mentioned earlier there might be transportation barriers, geographic barriers. Sometimes there are barriers that adults don't necessarily see easily that are there in the minds of youth. What are solutions? What are practical strategies that organizations can employ to identify those barriers and overcome those barriers? How do you know what's keeping the youth from getting to your program or staying in the program?
In the research with the youth, we didn't hear what I would call a consistent set of barriers. So we were expecting from some of the literature searches that we had done to hear more about transportation, more about money. I think the organizations that were in these neighborhoods understood and tried to accommodate their need for public transportation and accessibility, low price. A lot of the organizations that we studied in the case studies offered their programs for free, and one of them paid people to be there in a social entrepreneurship model. When we talked about it, it was really very family specific. And I would just say that we didn't hear as much as we expected about transportation. The overall theme that kept coming up was, if it's really interesting to the young person, there was this, where there's a will, there's a way, we'll find it. But we didn't hear that there was any one thing. I think the other point I'd make is that more on the social psychology side, what was really important for young people was that it had to be seen within their peer group as normal. Right? So we talked before about how important the peer group is for tweens. Something called descriptive norms. It just refers to whether any activity is seen as normal and accepted within the peer group. So for them, we didn't hear about what we call the functional or pragmatic barriers as much, like transportation and cost. What we really heard was, what are my friends going to think about it? Am I part of the group that does this? Am I part of another group where we're into sports or we're into video games, and were the arts kind of part of what we do? And if it wasn't, that was probably the biggest barrier.
Thank you. And another question that came up from several people was about buy-in. We've talked a lot about how to get the youth on board with your programming, but folks have had some questions specifically about the leadership of their organization. One person was writing about her school principal. She's a teaching artist, independent teaching artist, wants to get the principal more on board with her. Other folks were asking about parents. How do you get the parents on board? Can you say a little bit more, expand on what you shared earlier?
Sure. We'll, we've heard a lot from organizations about, and we were able to participate thanks to YUSA in a roundtable that they convened of arts program directors and program managers at Ys across the country, and they talked about how getting their CEOs on board has been so essential to their success. And so certainly having people observe the programs, and we heard this from other places too. Youth Speaks in San Francisco, a spoken word organization that partners with schools regularly. They said, the #1 way to have someone really understand the value and power of these programs is to observe them directly. So that seems like an obvious one, but it's important. And I think, having young people attest to the meaning of these programs in their lives. We, through the research, were able to talk with youth participants, and they did have so much to say about how valuable the programs are to them in so many different ways. And so inviting someone to speak at a school board meeting, a youth participant to speak at a school board meeting, to speak at a board meeting, to speak to a management team, I think that's another important strategy, that testimony.
Great. Peter.
Yeah, and I talked about it briefly when I was talking about the parent focus groups. What all the parents wanted, they wanted their kids to be happy, and a lot of them wanted to have a ticket out of poverty. And so, you know, the be happy is really the table stakes. I think when we were talking to them and said, oh, well, what is the ticket out if not arts? A lot of them said, well, sports can be a ticket out, whether it was to a scholarship or a career, especially for the parents of middle school boys. And so it didn't come up directly as a request, but I just think empirically, if you listen to what they were saying, I think the more linkages you can make between the skills that they're building in an arts program and the idea that there are jobs in arts. And I think their mental model might be, as I said, it's the struggling artist. It's, you know, the person who's trying to sell their paintings, but what they're not seeing are all of the design jobs and graphic artist jobs. I think that would be helpful, because what seemed to be holding them back when we were talking to them in the groups, they said, yeah, arts is great, but what are you going to do with arts? Like, where's that going to go? And they had no trouble saying, well, at least sports, you know, you might become a professional athlete, even though as we sat in the back room, we're probably thinking that the odds of finding a steady job in arts might be significantly better than becoming a player in the NFL or NBA.
Right.
I'll mention one other thing too, and that's that people talked about identifying people within a school or within a staff of a community organization who have an affinity for the arts, and that by asking around and identifying those people who maybe have a hobby, maybe played an instrument in college or high school, and just have an interest, that was really helpful to them in terms of finding those folks, knowing that they were supportive, you know, engaging them in the program in some fashion. And then the other thing that people talked about doing is that when a principal changed or when a CEO of a Y changed, immediately making contact with the new person and starting to build that relationship, just, you know, finding out what their interest level might be, but just getting in there right away and starting to pave the way for support.
Right. One great thing about arts programming is it offers lots of opportunities for engagement, not just at culminating events or exhibitions, but along the way bringing folks in to see the at work, creating and developing and rehearsing. I want to ask too about partnership. We've had a number of questions from different folks in different types of organizations, some in arts organizations wanting to know, how do I partner with organizations working in juvenile justice or the larger after-school community, folks at a YMCA looking for arts education partners. Anything that you can say about collaboration or any advice that you have for folks looking for partners looking to learn more about how to partner? Where can they find out more about that?
Sure. Well, it's such a great strategy, and I know many people on the line are engaged in partnerships and exploring them. So, trying to identify a partner that complements your strengths, and maybe you have mastery or just maybe you've got 5 of the principles down, and you're looking for someone who complements to get closer to achieving the 10. For an organization that maybe is less familiar with the arts community, they could go to their local arts agency to get some suggestions or advice of organizations that they might approach, and that can be a way to identify teaching artists too. The Guild's publication on partnership that came out last December, More Than the Sum of Its Parts, I think is an excellent resource and candid in just some of the ups and downs, and just a really practical, strong tool. So I encourage anyone engaged in a partnership to read that.
Great. And maybe one last question before we need to wrap up and go, and that is about place. Lots of folks listening in today are at place-based organizations with facilities. And there's really sort of 2 models for programming in this world. One is sending teaching artists out into the community where the youth are, and the other is attracting youth into organizations. So we had a question from somebody saying, how do I get the kids to come in to my place? You talked a little earlier about creating safe space and teams. Can you say anything more about how to get the kids to cross the threshold and come into this?
Well, we heard a lot about demonstrations, and so some of the organizations will go out to schools and they will do demonstrations with young people. I think that's a powerful component to show, you could be doing this, in 6 months you could be dancing like this, or you could be doing that. And also trial periods And a lot of young people, this came up actually both from the case study organizations, but also in the focus groups with the young people. They want to be able to try something out before they kind of sign up for a whole program. It's interesting because a lot of the case study organizations actually have waiting lists. They have so much demand for their programs. But I would suggest those two things, and then partnerships is another way, to get young people in the door.
Just to echo one of Denise's points, if a young person doesn't see themselves as one of the art kids, and they're thinking, do I want to try this out? The idea of signing up for something, even with what we said before, that there really are not a lot of barriers to quitting. The idea of, do I want to take an 8-week program? Do I want to take a 10-week program? Can just be intimidating, because in order to even take that to your parents, you have to say, I'm that interested in it. So that idea of demonstration, just do it once, like a 3-hour rapid immersion in animation or filmmaking or just anything where they say, wow, that was fun, I want more of that. It really turns the tide. It creates the pull. I want to do that more, rather than do I see myself as an animator, which can just be too big of a leap for someone who hasn't tried it yet.
And something else that we saw and learned about is programs are successful when they're really specific with the program description. So rather than something like, dance 1, dance 2, film 1, film 2, saying, you will finish this program with a portfolio of 5 digital prints. We will explore this neighborhood together, and you'll document it in your film. You will be part of a team of 3 filmmakers doing X and Y. Getting really specific, that makes it exciting and alluring for young people.
Well, thank you. So just a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask both you, Peter and Denise, any final thoughts that you want to leave people with?
Well, I thought of something else related to the question about youth councils, and this is just a plug for watching the videos. One of the people that we interviewed said, our young people are getting a chance to choose their own heroes, and they don't get to do that often in the educational system and elsewhere. And we had so much just rich insight and observation. That's why we decided to do the videos. So I do encourage you to watch them for both ideas and also some inspiration. If it really, it was just terrific having a chance to hear directly from practitioners and learn from them.
I was going to say the same thing, do the videos, but okay, I'll come up with something else. I think the final thought was just, I think the approach that we took, balancing the demand and the supply, it was, it's interesting for us as researchers, but I think there's some good wisdom there for anyone who's trying to do this, and I mentioned that earlier in my presentation, just to be very sensitive to the voice of the consumer. It probably surprised me a little bit when we started the project, and Wallace said, no one's really done this before, and I thought, really? I mean, why wouldn't they? And then they reminded us of the economics and the issues, but just the idea. I mean, as we went out and did the research, and we said, well, we're taking this approach that young people are consumers, and people said, well, that's novel, and it shouldn't be, right? And so I think that would be my final thought, is that anyone who's making decisions about either how to spend their time or how to spend their money as a consumer,